Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Norman Education Research Day 2020, the virtual version. My name's Lawrence Grierson. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Health Sciences Education Graduate Program, and it's my great privilege to welcome you today. I'm happy to welcome all of our new and returning Health Sciences Education graduate students. Welcome to our community. I'd like to welcome the MERIT membership and scholarship groups that we interact with regularly. And I'm really happy to be able to welcome a number of people that are able to engage with our Education Research Day from a great distance and from other institutions, given the access that the virtual version of the conference provides. I'd like to begin the day by acknowledging that the Health Sciences Education and Merit offices, from which I'm broadcasting, are located on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people. This territory, covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, and is directly adjacent to the Haldeman Treaty Territory. My home, from where I have, for the most part, been working, as many of you have, is located on lands that, in addition to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations, is traditional territory for the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, and the Wendat nations. I'm going to ask you all to reflect for a moment on the peoples for whom the place from which you are receiving this transmission is traditional territory. And I invite you to take a couple of moments and maybe perhaps write the names of those nations in the chat group so that we can acknowledge that widely. If you're not familiar with that, you're at your computer, and I'll encourage you to pop open Google and figure that out and add it in. We recognize the indigenous inhabitants of the land to bring the ongoing systemic oppression that affects indigenous communities to the forefront of our minds. When I think about this, I find myself drifting towards the figure of speech that it goes without saying, but that's not right. We make a land acknowledgement, and we remember George Floyd and Regis Korchinski-Parquet and many others, and here's another opportunity for you to add names of any Black and Indigenous people that have been victim to systemic violence into the chat. We remember these names because it does need to be said. Anti-Indigenous and anti-Black racism exists. This isn't a difficult thing to acknowledge. The evidence from our healthcare and education fields is clear. We see it in the lower life expectancies, the higher maternal birth rates, and other health disparities that disproportionately affect Black and Indigenous people. We've heard it through the lived experiences of our Black and Indigenous colleagues, that healthcare work environments are unwelcoming and discriminatory. As educators, when we review the makeup of our health professional classes and faculty complements, when we review the conceptualizations of merit that we value and whom they favor, and when we look at the content that is covered and not covered in our curriculum, we see that this racism is embedded in the structures and policies of our institutions of education. So it's known, and we've acknowledged it. And with this in mind, as we continue, we begin to recognize that racism is no longer just implicit, it's complicit, and we need to own this and act on it. We need to commit to critical reflection that place explicit attention to the assumptions embedded in the processes and power structures that make up our training programs. And we need to aim this reflection towards action and transformation. We need to donate, and money talks. If you don't have it, then donate your time and energy. And we need to educate ourselves. Today, we'll be using we're drawing your attention to the HSED and the MERIT Twitter profiles. You'll find these profiles in the top right-hand corner in the little bird icon of the Norman Education Day website. Throughout the day, we will be sharing resources and amplifying the voices of Black and Indigenous scholars that are providing their time and energy to educate on these matters. We'll be circulating statements from the President's Advisory Council Office, from the African Caribbean Faculty Association and McMaster, both of which have calls to action and offer places for educators and members of our community to reach out to seek guidance and support as needed. We want you to follow these people. We want you to retweet these messages. We're gonna indicate places where you can donate. We want you to donate, and hopefully, we can all do this together. This is something that we all need to do together. Of course, we also have an excellent opportunity this morning to share with each other and to start discussions here in our education conference. So I encourage you all to enter into the day with a spirit of cultural humility, to enter in the sessions with a willingness to learn and to listen, and to use the break times and the break rooms that we have available to gather and to discuss the power that we have as educators, healthcare providers, and researchers, leaders in the field to enact change. As we move forward with the agenda for Norman Education Research Day, I'm really pleased to be able to start with a message from Geoff Norman, who I'm not sure if he's on the call or not right now, but he has created a video in advance for us. So please just bear with me as I share my screen and we turn it over to Dr. Norman for a few minutes.
Hi, my name is Geoff Norman. It's my privilege to welcome you to the 5th annual MERIT Conference on Health Sciences Education. The conference began when I officially retired 5 years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't quite take my own advice and I'm still working. I've actually been in the field 50 years as of next year, and it goes without saying that the field has changed enormously in that time. In particular, one of the changes that's most dramatic is the way the field has expanded, and that in turn has bearing on why this conference exists. 50 years ago, the number of PhDs in the field could be easily counted on one hand, and there weren't that many more physicians or health professionals who were doing research in medical education. Just to give you some example as to how much the field has expanded, the first slide shows the number of submissions to the journal Advances in Health Sciences Education. The journal itself began 25 years ago. I was the founding editor and just stepped down this year. As you can see, in the first few years, there was 10 or 15, 20 submissions, barely enough to put out as many issues as we wanted to. However, this year we project that we'll have more than 1,000 submissions. That's one indicator of how much the field has grown. Another is looking at attendance at the Association of Medical Education in Europe meeting. The first one occurred in Beersheba, Israel in 2000. The number of attendees comfortably fitted into a very small hotel. The last conference, last year in Austria, in Vienna, had 3,600 participants from 102 countries. Both of those are indicators that the field has grown quite literally by orders of magnitude. So what does that have to do with this conference? Well, in the old days, we were all in an apprenticeship mode. We were all learning together. And the PhDs weren't that well trained anyway, so we all had to work at it. And it was kind of an amateur hobby thing. Nowadays, there's far too many people who want to get into the field to have that kind of approach. Instead, we have seen master's programs like our own spring up all around the world, and probably hundreds and hundreds of health professionals graduate from these programs every year. In order for that education to be effective, there has to be a number of venues, and of course, master's programs are one. But I think conferences like this are also very important in that they give students an opportunity to do research, to report their research and practice it in front of their peers, and to get good feedback. And that really is the hope and aspiration for the next few hours. So I wish you all well. I hope everybody has a good time and learns a lot. Thank you very much for coming.
A few bits of etiquette for the day and using the Zoom platform for engaging in our sessions. The program has been easily laid out and nicely accessible through the normanresearchday.ca website. We do have a few requests. When you are joining a room, we ask that your Zoom name be your full name as it's on the participant list. This will help us keep track of who we have today, and also to ensure that that we don't have anybody joining our meetings that are that we don't really want to be there. If you are going to be calling in by telephone, we'll ask you to email Samantha at merit@mcmaster.ca with the phone number that you will use to dial in. Again, this will help us with tracking. There's an FAQs option on the Help Me tab of the website, again, normanresearchday.ca. If you have any issues during the day, please tweet at MERIT or HSED at the profiles. As I said, you'll find those profile links in the top right corner of the website. You can also email MERIT or HSED at their mcmaster.ca addresses. Please know that the sessions will be recorded. This session is being recorded, and this will all be available for asynchronous viewing later via the MERIT Secure web, YouTube channel. We'd like you to give your feedback on the day. This is a new experience for us. We have an opportunity for you to do that. It's at the bottom of our homepage. Again, at the Norman Research Day website, and those of you who do choose to give us feedback will be entered into a draw to win a gift card. Exciting. Last thing before we turn it over to the Q&A is for all the new incoming health sciences education graduate students, we have a half-an-hour session at the conclusion of the conference for welcome and for debriefing on some of the content you may have experienced. Please join us. Allison and Bronte from the student representation group will be answering questions and welcoming you. And actually all of our health sciences education graduates or students are welcome to participate in that short event. Okay, I always get, she probably doesn't know this, but I always get really excited when there's like a new Woods and Myopolis paper that comes out. She's one of the people that I like to follow in the medical education research community. So it's a great honor to be able to welcome Dr. Nicole Woods to our Education Research Day today. Dr. Woods is an education scientist and Associate Director of the Wilson Center at the University of Toronto at the University Health Network. She joined U of T in 2006 and leads a successful program of research in health professions education. The goal of her work is to transform the training of health professionals by developing models of knowledge acquisition and expertise development, and translate these models into tools and techniques for education. For 15 years, Dr. Woods has led studies of memory and decision-making that explore the impact of biomedical knowledge on clinical reasoning. Her research has significant implications for education across the developmental continuum and for a variety of health disciplines. She's currently an associate professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. She's also the Senior Director of Education and Research Integration and the inaugural Scientific Director of the Institute for Education Research at UHN. What the bio on our website doesn't tell you is that Dr. Woods is our very own. She is a McMaster graduate. And a former student of Dr. Norman. So at the same time of welcoming her to the day, we are also welcoming her back. Without any further ado, I will mute my microphone and I'll turn it over to Dr. Woods.
Great. Thank you very much, Lawrence, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to join you all today. I'm really just absolutely impressed at your ability to pull together this day in this virtual format, and I'm really pleased that I'm able to return to McMaster to have this conversation with you all. It means a lot, so thank you. So hopefully everyone had an opportunity to take a look at the keynote presentation that we recorded for you and posted a few days ago. So if you didn't have a chance to look at it, that's okay. You're still in the right place. We can still have a great talk, and I'm sure you'll still enjoy the conversation. But if you haven't had a chance, it is still posted. So you can, and I see that the link is there in the chat. So if you'd like to take a look at it at any time, you're welcome to do so. And I'm happy to answer your questions down the line if you don't have a chance to look at it right now. So overall, hopefully what you'll get from the video when you have a chance to take a look at it is a general idea of the body of work that we've been doing over the last 10 to 15 years. And a lot of it really is very Norman-esque. A lot of it is very much inspired by my training with Geoff and Lee Brooks in the psychology department. And so my hope is that I've done them justice and not embarrassed them too much. But I think that what you'll see is a lot of conversation about just fundamental cognition. I've been in medical education for a long time, but I still very much consider myself a cognitive psychologist. And so my work is really rooted in those fundamental concepts from cognition. And so what I'm trying to do in the last few years is really take some of those principles and apply them and see what we can do in terms of using those principles to develop a model of expert cognition and to develop some tips, strategies, techniques, tools, whatever we can for health professions education. So throughout the course of the presentation, what I tried to share with you is really a focus on our expert development work and our work on the integration of basic and clinical science. So all of the papers that I cited in the talk are available to you, and I'm happy to share them. But for now, maybe I'll just take any questions that people have from the work. Questions or comments, I'm happy to respond. Outbursts, whatever you got, I can take it.
We'll try to run this fairly casually. If people want to unmute and well, I see we actually have a hand up. We'll work with the hands. You can also use the chat to type in a question if you like. So Syed, I see that you have your hand up. If you'd like to unmute and ask Dr. Woods a question, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. I was thrilled to hear your lecture. And I've been teaching basic medical microbiology for about 20 years in different medical schools. And when I heard you speak about how important basic sciences are in development of clinical reasoning and clinical knowledge, I was thrilled beyond my imagination. The thing is, I've seen things transforming the whole spectrum of things. Like there was a time when people used to study a lot of microbiology or a lot of basic sciences without any relation to clinical medicine. And now is a time when students do not know anything beyond Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and E. coli. And many efforts in between, they are half-hearted attempts for integration of these two things. I just wanted to ask you, what are the things that you perceive would be, or what would be the way ahead to bring out writing new textbooks, new ways of writing textbooks, or creating very comprehensive study guides? I just wanted to have your opinion about that. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you for your question, Said. So the first part I'm going to address is that I'm preparing you for what I'm about to say, which might not make you very happy, but I think that you can trust me that it is an evidence-based recommendation. So the reason I'm saying it's not going to make you very happy is because over the last few years, one of the things we've really focused on is what's our definition of integration, right? What does it really mean to integrate? And I will admit that a lot of the times, and we talked a little bit about this in the presentation, we looked at the literature, the different types of integration at the program level, at the course level, at the session level. And a lot of the efforts at integration at the program level involve one of two things: moving the basic science around in the program or dumping more and more basic science into the curriculum. So the challenge with this from my work and from the data that we have is that the solution to integration isn't necessarily more basic science. In fact, if you achieve cognitive integration the way we intend for you to, chances are you're going to end up with less. So the reason for this is because what we've seen when we talked about like that semantic network, the idea behind building connections, the connections have to be strong and they have to be durable, but they also have to be relevant. And sometimes with basic science, we can get almost too many connectors to the point where there's so much in-depth basic science that it loses its connection to the clinical. So when I talk about integration, I really focus on having this tightly connected package. That means that the only basic science that's included is the things that directly help you understand a causal mechanism that's linked directly to clinical signs and symptoms, clinical practice. So that might mean you lose some of the depth of basic science knowledge. You might be able to make up with it with a little bit of breadth. In terms of a specific path forward, it's up in the air for me. I think there's a lot of different things that we can do pedagogically. The idea of writing new textbooks, I'm not averse to that. In fact, the one experiment that we talked about in the talk, the very first one, which was Mariam Baghdadi's doctoral thesis, where she worked with the authors of a textbook in oral radiology. And one of the authors of the textbook, we used his algorithm. He was actually a member of our research team. And he was a member of the team who was absolutely convinced that that structured algorithm group was going to beat the pants off of the other two conditions. He was convinced that this algorithm was the way to go. And so he was just stunned when the algorithm group actually turned out to be the poorest performing group. And we've continued to use that algorithm group as our control condition in many other experiments because we know it almost always is the poorest performing group. And to his credit, when his name is Mike Farrell, when Mike Farrell went to rewrite the next edition of his textbook, he invited Mariam to actually contribute to the writing of the textbook and asked her to rewrite several sections of it to bring in more of the basic science and to have a more of an integrated approach. Mike did not abandon his algorithm. He actually wanted us to have another experiment where we combined the basic science and the algorithm, but I was just like, I'm past the algorithm, dude, like, let's just let it go. But he really did take it up. He took the results very, very seriously and made an effort to revise the textbook. So I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a good start. There are other pedagogical tools, things like anyone who knows Naomi Steinhoff's work on productive failure. There are other ways of discovery learning. There are many things we can do, but again, I'm not averse to a really good textbook either. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
We have a question from in two parts from Melchor Sanchez, who's in Mexico. I'm going to read it from the chat. Do you have some tips to integrate the different cultures of clinicians and basic scientists so they work together? In Mexico, they are very critical of each other, and it's a challenge to sit them at the same table. In follow-up, as science has progressed impressively in the last few decades, it's becoming more difficult to define what is basic science and what is not. Clinical epidemiology, genomics, system science, etc. How do you envision the evolution of the concept of basic sciences in health professions for the future? So two parts. How do you get basic scientists and clinicians from different perspectives sitting at the same table? And where do you draw the line for what is a basic science?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first part about how do we get them to work together, it's not just Mexico, I have to say. So one of the biggest challenges that I've seen repeatedly in many, many medical schools is how do you get these two groups of faculty members to come together and integrate, right? So it's integration of faculty, but it's also integration of content. These are difficult things. And so I think the first piece is, and this is kind of a radical suggestion, but I think it's worth trying. It's abandoning kind of courses and course directors. And let me explain why I think this is part of the challenge. One of the most threatening things is when you've been teaching a course in a particular way for who knows how long. You could have been teaching that biochemistry course for the last 20 years, and then someone comes in and says, by the way, that's all wrong, and we need to get rid of stuff. And that is an incredibly threatening experience for a faculty member, even if you've only been teaching it for 1 or 2 years. And so I think that we have a habit of allowing people to kind of take ownership of the curricula without really realizing that the curriculum is for everyone. And it doesn't belong to any one group. And I think that kind of helps if we give everyone responsibility for all of the courses across pre-clerkship, clerkship. It really has to have more of a distributed model of responsibility. The other thing is I like suggesting that people work in teams to create educational materials that can then be delivered by any member of the team. So yes, you have pairs or triads or even teams of 5 or 6 faculty members all working together to create lecture materials, to create whatever the content might be, with the assumption that in the end, all of these faculty members, basic science members and clinical members, can be responsible for delivering it. So everyone wants to, again, have an opportunity to engage with students on the front lines. No one wants to see their discipline being kind of shoved aside. And so it's really setting an opportunity to start from scratch with new materials that people don't own and ensuring that it's team design with individual delivery. And these are difficult conversations. It's about kind of going slowly, taking time, and being considerate of people's feelings. I think that's important. And then the other question about where do I draw the line? So the challenge with this is I don't really draw a line. As far as I'm concerned, anything that can help to provide a deeper understanding, mechanistic understanding of clinical content can be considered the basic science. And I'm less concerned about how we draw those boundaries. What I focus on, though, is integration. So I don't think this means we need to cram everything under the sun into the curriculum. So I'm happy to expand the definition of basic science, but not the purpose of basic science. It still has to be tightly linked to clinical practice. And so when we have these kind of curriculum debates about how we're going to include new content, I really want people to explain to me, okay, tell me how this links to better understanding of clinical practice. And if it can be directly and explicitly linked, I'm all for it. And I'm happy to include social sciences, behavioral sciences, whatever, epidemiology, whatever it takes to be included in the curriculum. That's fine with me.
Well, health sciences education graduate student, thesis student Samuel Jarman has a follow-up question that right to that point. So with respect to integrating basic science mechanisms with clinical skills, is there consideration to mechanisms that are poorly understood? What about when the science doesn't explain everything?
Yeah, this is always a challenge, right? So in some of the experiments, I have to say, we actually, and this is very much inspired by my work in the psychology department, not only did we not have really fully fleshed out definitions, we made up the diseases entirely. So we've done experiments where we've made up the diseases, made up the explanations, and it all still kind of operates the same way. So I appreciate that science has to be flexible, and that's the whole point of approaching this as building a semantic network. When you are building a semantic network, not every connection is as strong as others. And the connections are supposed to change, right? They're supposed to be dynamic. As you gain more knowledge, you change the connection. So I don't think we should be too hesitant in saying, oh, well, I don't know, this might not be accurate. As long as it's our best approximation based on current understanding, we can change this as things move forward. Human beings, human cognition is flexible. It's not like it's completely static. So when I work with faculty, I get them to give me their best approximation of a mechanism that they have in this current time. The bigger challenge I find when you're trying to operationalize this is not that the connections aren't known, it's that the connections aren't known to that particular faculty member. And their fear is usually that they don't understand the science well enough to teach it. And so that's actually a solvable problem because we have basic science faculty members in our schools. And so that's why I asked for the group work on the creation so that, yes, if this one faculty member doesn't know the connection, somebody else might, and they might actually have a deeper understanding.
Okay. Dr. Natasha Stelgrove, who's a recent graduate of our program and someone
and ours.
Yeah. Just a comment from Natasha before another question. So as both a psychiatrist and a medical educator, I really appreciated your perspective on broadening what basic science is to things like psychology and sociology, making the statement, these are so critical to answering the why questions in her discipline. Not new, it's been a full year now. HSED graduate student Bronte Johnston has a question that I think she'll be grateful that we've invited you and not Dr. Kulasegaram to answer it. She asks, do different learning styles influence cognitive integration with basic science and clinical skills?
Yes, you're lucky it's me today. Yeah, so I think if Mahan were here, he would say, of course, I love learning styles. They are the most important piece. And I would like everyone to now text him and tell him that I said that he would have said that. We have not seen any evidence that learning styles would make a difference. And so it's highly unlikely. I cannot think of a situation where it would make a difference in this case. I would suspect that in this case, you're just basic human cognition that's common across individuals, like your basic memories. These are all concepts from human memory and attention and decision making, and those are pretty standard. The only spot, and this is again, please tell Mahan, the only spot where possibly learning styles could come into play is in the extent to which students have an option of whether or not they're going to engage with the material. So it's entirely possible, as we know, learning styles in many ways are preferences. So the extent to which students have control over their ability to engage with the instruction, then maybe. But we've literally seen nothing else that would impact it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm of the mind that, well, there might not be learning styles. It doesn't mean that learning isn't stylish. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From recent health science education graduate Megan Slack, can you provide an example of what the basic sciences provided for the dental radiological slides would look like, or that you had included in your study? How in depth was that basic science? How much time was spent?
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I couldn't give you the exact science part. Normally in my talk, I would have it available to read it to you because Miriam created it, but I'll give you some sense of it. So what we do when we create the materials is we outline all of the clinical features. So in Miriam's study, it would have been a list of the radiographic features for each of the 4 conditions. Then for each feature, we come up with a basic science explanation of why that sign or symptom, that feature occurs. So it's literally feature, and then why does it happen? And we give 1 to 2 sentence explanation. That's it. You could go deeper. So my general rule of thumb when we're creating the materials in the lab is we only provide 1 to 2 sentences of explanation. You could argue that there's a lot of room for more depth, but we haven't seen it necessary. And so this is why I'm saying sometimes you lose some of the basic science content. But in our experiments, for the purpose of the experiments, we only do a few sentences. I would say if I was doing this in the real world and I was creating instructional materials, my guide for people is to answer 2 levels of why. 2 complete levels of why should be sufficient. And after that, people's eyes are starting to glaze over and they don't really have any interest. We've had other experiments when we first started running it, we'd provide much more. And what we saw was that the participants would kind of highlight around and avoid a lot of the basic science content. So it just really wasn't productive.
Mary, and I don't have any more information about Mary here other than that's her first name.
Okay.
With a general comment, which you may want to respond to. In her opinion, I think that there's a general fear when the word basic science is used in medical literature. Students tend to skim over it. And the idea of adding a basic science concept right after a clinical concept is genius, presumably in the way that it promotes engagement with that material. And as your evidence showed, very effective. So if you had a comment on that?
Yeah, I do think that the word basic, so thank you. I do think it's genius as well. But I agree with you. I think that labeling things as basic science is scary, and it's scary it's annoying for the students because it's a flag to them that this is not important. Like that's literally what you're saying. When you label as basic science, you're screaming, this is not important. This is a hurdle you have to jump over until you get to the real part of being a doctor. So I 100% agree that it's concerned, can be scary for a student. It's also scary for faculty members. So clinical faculty are always afraid that they have forgotten a lot of their basic science. And so when you tell them that they have to teach the basic science, they get concerned. But the only way integration works is if everybody is on board for teaching both parts, the clinical and the basic science. So that's another reason why I really like the idea of not having a focus on courses. So having a biochemistry course only tells everybody that this course is not important. So I think that it's a better way is to focus on the clinical and bring in the basic science to explain, and then no one has a choice to skip it. It really becomes an integrated fundamental part of practice that you can't just avoid out of fear.
Sally Banks, also an HSED graduate and someone who will be known to you as a PhD
Yes.
student at the Wilson Center. Hi, Sally. Asks, a lot of education happens post-licensure in the clinical area. how do we promote the importance of integration in this domain, given the great divide between the two worlds?
Yeah, I've been asked this question a lot, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately about how do we move this conversation beyond undergrad. And I agree, Sally. I think that a lot of education happens at a later time. And at that point, we do start to abandon any mention of basic science. But I see no reason why we should do that. In fact, many faculty members say to me when they hear me present, they say, you know what, if I could go back to medical school now and relearn the basic science, it would be so much more. It would be easier for me. I would see the relevance and I would appreciate it more. So I think that there is an opportunity, this is definitely an opportunity for scholarship and research in other areas and continuing professional development in postgrad. There's a lot of room, and I think we would see many of the same effects if we just took the opportunity. I don't see why the mechanism of cognitive integration would be any different at a post-licensure level. It's at this point, this is purely an education pedagogical problem, not even a cognition problem.
Dr. Wayman suggests that maybe the word fundamental sciences is preferred to basic sciences.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I've talked a little bit about that, and I kind of agree that we might need another word. I've gone back and forth. Sometimes I say foundational sciences, but fundamental sciences. Yeah, I think that would help us a little bit have broader conversations. But those are the two that I use.
Dr. Brand-Vegas, Daniel is a member of the MERIT community with a comment that I think can be posed as a question. I think the idea of how much basic science is necessary to answer the question of why for different clinical situations will vary significantly depending on the level of clinical uncertainty. When there's high uncertainty and little clinical research to support a diagnostic or therapeutic plan, you may argue a greater need for a deeper level of basic science knowledge and understanding to make decisions, which raises the question of vice versa. Is basic science less necessary in low uncertainty contexts?
Yeah, I think I don't really go with, I wouldn't say it's less necessary, but some of the early work, when I first started doing this work, there was a few studies that tried to get people to explicitly use their basic science when they were solving a problem. So actually overtly articulate how you're using your basic science. And it was very hard for people to do that for kind of routine cases. But if they had a really difficult case, that's when you would see people just spontaneously kind of revert to first principles and bring in all their basic science. So I think it's possible that in a really difficult situation, a case of uncertainty, ambiguity, complexity, for those situations, you might see more explicit articulation of the basic science, and there might be some value for that. But I don't think that means that in routine cases, the basic science is less valuable. I think it's just unlikely to be explicitly articulated. It's still there. So if we go back to our idea of this cognitive structure, the connections are always there, and they're always an important part. They just never rise to the level of the overt utterance until you really need it to. So that's how I would kind of make the distinction between kind of a routine problem and a difficult problem. It's more about levels of explicit articulation than about value of basic science.
That it's needed in both cases.
It's needed,
but one's likely to call upon it when it becomes more difficult, or express it when it becomes a more difficult situation.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a nice follow-up question from Will Johnston in the HSED program. Is there a minimum, maximum, or sweet spot for how much of the basic science you feel should be integrated into the curriculum?
Yeah, I think it's when everybody is equally unhappy, then you've probably hit your sweet spot. It's very, very hard to say exactly when you're hitting the right spot. But it is true that someone is bound to think there's too little, and this happens a lot with my basic science colleagues. They're just convinced that this is a complete, like, there's no way you could possibly understand this. But I don't know if there's necessarily, I can't give a quantifiable sweet spot. But I do think that I can tell you when you're starting to go into kind of the danger zone of having too much basic science. And it's when you're starting to do what we call contextualization. So with integration, what you're doing is you're taking the clinical and using the basic science to support understanding of the clinical. With contextualization, what you're doing is teaching the basic science and using the clinical as examples of basic science mechanisms. And those are very different things. So when you start kind of prioritizing the basic science and using cases as only examples of the basic science, you've probably gone too far in terms of your basic science content. So I can say that, but yeah, we'd have to do a little bit more kind of real world work to figure out at what point you've kind of, you don't have enough basic science. Your assessments actually would be good to help you understand that as well.
We're always looking for the doses.
Yeah.
I can keep reading from here. I feel like it's been a bombardment of questions. I'm not sure if this format sets up for more rapid fire or than it would in person. But Dr. Woods, how about I offer you the last few minutes before the close of the session to summarize or wrap up or to leave us with any parting thoughts?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Lawrence. So I really hope that everyone had a chance to take a look at the talk, and please take a look later. And I don't mind the bombardment of questions. So if you have more questions, just please send me an email. I'm happy to keep chatting. I think my big take home for this is, as not surprisingly, involves integration. I think that we have done a lot of that kind of foundational experimental work to focus on what would integration look like in a lab setting and what's the value of it for medical cognition. And what I would like to see moving forward from really the entire field is I think there's a huge design space here for answers around the pedagogy. Like, how do we bring this into practice? How do we bring this into education practice specifically? And really, how do we move this across the entire continuum? So what I would really like to see moving forward is more effort and attention to all of this great work in cognition. I think that the focus on these experiments was just to lay a foundation, and that moving forward, I'd like to see more building on it for just scholarship and research. There's so much room here to play and do exciting things, and I'm really looking forward to how people are going to bring this piece to life. So that's my kind of take home. But thank you.
Thank you. I think that this is a real great example of medium and message for us. I think that our audience has really benefited from learning about the integration of basic sciences into clinical education, notions of preparation for future learning, and some of the design work. I think you've also put the pressure on us, especially in the health sciences education graduate program, to produce better online materials.
Sorry. Can I say one more thing on that?
Yes, you can.
I should also thank Doug Buller for working on that video. He did an amazing job. So he did all of the graphics and everything like that. So if anyone wants to know how he did that, I don't know. I can't tell you. So if you have any questions about how this was created, do not direct them to me, because I cannot answer them. I do not know, but it did look amazing. And I want to thank him a lot for the time and attention that he put into pulling together the video.
Yeah, well, the HSED program has successfully secured Doug for a virtual session sometime in the coming school year to come and speak to us about how he develops these tools. But a wonderful talk, wonderful discussion. Thanks for accommodating us in this this virtual format. As we discussed yesterday, it's not the most convenient way to do work. And to be engaged, but like you said, we can't stop doing these things, and we can't stop gathering as a community to discuss education.
Exactly. Thank you all for participating, and for you guys for continuing the conversation. Much appreciated.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Woods.